And now, you're tuned into RBLR, the home of Tampa Bay's RBLR Sports.
This is your RBLR Race podcast. I'm your host, Zach Dobb, along with my co-host, Pat Davenport. Pat, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm doing well. I mean, I just saw one of the greatest football/soccer upsets maybe in the past 10 years with Plymouth Argyle, the team my dad supports, beating Liverpool, who are like the best team in the country. Plymouth Argyle are bottom of the second division. So there are like 43 teams in between them in the pyramid of English football, and wow. They beat them. It would be the equivalent, I suppose, of like the worst AAA team beating the Dodgers. So that was a big day for me. So I'm feeling hyped up, and more importantly, pitchers and catchers report on Wednesday. So we're almost there. In fact, next time we pod to you, it'll be a spring training pod.
It'll be a spring training pod. It'll be we've got a few days until baseball is being played pod. It's going to be a great pod. We've got a great pod for you today. Fully stacked show. We're really excited to have you guys here with us as we get kind of set before the season starts. Next week, we're going to come at you hot with positional previews. We're going to go through all the positional groups, talk about all the key players that are going to be at those position groups. We're going to break all that down. But before we do that, we've got this show, and we're really glad that you're here. If you're joining us for the first time, thank you. If you're joining us coming back after the offseason, kind of want to know what happened while you were gone, this is the show for you, because we're going to break everything down right from the last game of the regular season all the way through to right now. So sit tight. We got it all for you. If you are coming back and joining us again, we really appreciate you guys. If you do us a huge favor and drop us a follow or a subscribe wherever you guys like to watch or follow us, that helps us out a whole bunch. It's free, supports the show, and it lets you know when we go live, because we're going to have some absolutely electric content for you coming up here as we go into the season. We're going to be breaking everything down. We're really excited about it. It's going to be a really exciting season. But before we get there, we've got to talk about how we got here, how we got to the beginning of the season, and what happened. And in order to say how we got here, we got to start with how last season ended, which was not great. Losing 4 of our last 6 games, going 2-4 in a period of time where, if you can remember all the way back, we went into that series with Detroit thinking if we could sweep, we had a shot at the playoffs. Instead, we got kind of annihilated, not annihilated, but it was bad, and then ended up 2-4 for over those last 6 games. Playoff hopes dashed, ending under 500. Just kind of an not great end of the season. Time of death for the 24 season, 5:19 p.m. on September 29th. Nothing else in a baseball sense happened until the beginning of November. However, a very, very significant event happened in October on the 9th when Hurricane Milton came through and blew the roof off the place, making light of what was a really rough event, I think, for everybody who is a Rays fan and who is a resident of Tampa.
Yeah, it threw everything off from a off-season perspective, both on and off the field. Business was disrupted by this. So for anyone that is sleeping under a rock and didn't know about Hurricane Milton, yeah, it destroyed Tropicana Field. The whole roof came off, flooded the stadium, and of course devastated the entire area around Tampa, St. Petersburg, many parts of Florida. And that meant a few things. First of all, the Rays were without a stadium to play baseball games in for the 2025 state season. It also meant that the upcoming vote for the new stadium that looked like it was going to be a foregone conclusion got delayed because, of course, attending to the needs of that were created from the hurricane got pushed forward in the agenda, delaying that vote till after what was the 2024 election, which changed the council quite significantly. And also it meant, because of all of that uncertainty, it created greater difficulties for the Rays to entice potential free agents to join their roster with the kind of both short and long-term future of the team in St. Petersburg and in Tampa Bay in general up in the air.
Yeah, October 30th, bond issuance delayed for the first time, like you said, citing Tropicana Field repairs being a discussion, citing the just general damage control for Milton, and really kind of putting, like you said, the entire rest of the offseason in doubt for the Rays. What would happen with the stadium? What would happen with free agents? Would anyone want to come here? And that, I think, if you're looking at what this offseason was, it's really hard to talk about the rest of the stuff that's happening without saying, hey, this entire offseason, while these moves that I'm about to get into are happening, there was this cloud hanging over our heads the entire offseason of what is going to happen with the stadium. Are the bonds going to get approved finally? We had no idea. So I think the reason why I wanted to kind of bring up everything with the stadium while we're talking about the moves that were happening is because I don't really think you could tell the story of this offseason and set the mindset of us as fans without talking about the stadium. Because you have the bond issuance gets delayed, and that's kind of the major thing that happens at the end of October. Then we get into November. The first kind of thing that happens is moves start being made. Justin Sterner, DFA'd. Renee Pinto gets DFA'd. Austin Shenton traded for cash. And then around then is when you have the Pinellas County elections. And that changes up the voting block for the county. That changes everything up. And then you see some even, some bigger, probably I don't want to say the biggest move, but one of the moves that was kind of the changes the roster the most in Jose Siri being traded to the New York Mets. Something we kind of, we thought that maybe Siri's time was numbered because of the way that he was performing, but Siri getting traded to the Mets really shook up the roster going into 2025.
Yeah, it was not a surprising trade, but I don't think one that we'd considered was definitely going to happen. And the outfield was considered an area of weakness for the Rays, even heading into the offseason. I don't know if they completely addressed that need, but they essentially wanted to stamp a culture shift onto the outfield by moving Siri, a player that had some incredible plays and some incredible stretches for the team, but really suffered from a lack of consistency, particularly in terms of the amount of strikeouts he was generating. And when he was cold, he was one of the worst hitters on a team that was already pretty bad offensively. And while he was a Gold Glove caliber fielder with elite speed, Kevin Cash had made it clear on multiple occasions that he wasn't always putting in the effort to deliver on those potentials, benching him on numerous occasions due to lack of effort. And there was a clear rift between Siri and Cash and the way that the team wanted him to play and how he was actually playing. So they put their foot down. They initiated a culture shift. They said, we would rather Johnny DeLuca, who is probably slightly more consistent of a hitter, a little bit worse defensively, is more what we're looking for. We'd rather give him the runway in center field than you, Jose Siri. So we'll see you later.
Yeah, and we have yet to see how that's going to go because the season hasn't started yet. But it's definitely something that the Rays did intentionally, and they clearly believe in Johnny DeLuca. And he showed us a lot of things, even last season as he was dealing with some injuries that give us some level of confidence as fans that, he's going to be able to hold it down. And for the Rays to make that move, obviously they feel the same way. That was kind of the biggest move that happened from baseball perspective in November. There was a few other things that happened at the end of the month, but before we get there, we have a nice little block of stadium stuff happening again. And the next kind of step of the stadium saga got kicked off on November 14th when the Rays announced that they were going to play at Steinbrenner Field. It was pretty clear almost immediately that the Trop would not be ready for opening day of 2025. This was confirmed pretty early on that it just was not going to happen. It was not going to be ready. There was even if they started the next day, just probably wasn't going to happen. So the search kind of began immediately to find a place to play. The two top candidates were Steinbrenner Field and the Phillies spring training location. And this kind of begins one of the more I don't know how to describe it. I don't want to say seedy because that seems a bit much, but just kind of generally unpleasant parts of the stadium saga where there was political maneuvering about where to play. And then we kind of get to November 16th through 21st, where there is just, general chaos. Stu in the Rays said the deal might be dead, citing the rising cost from the bond delay. Pinellas County delays the vote again. St. Pete has a vote on the 21st that can only be described as pandemonium. What happened there in the span of like 4 hours, where they voted to repair the trop. Brian Auld basically came in and told them, hey, no, we don't want you to rebuild the trop. The bond vote got delayed again, and then they came back and withdraw the vote to repair the trop. I don't think the vibes have ever been any worse than they were after that whole debacle on the 21st. I can remember after all that happened, the pod that we did. It was a little bit tough to see the sunshine through the clouds on that one. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah, I think you summed it up perfectly when you said the vibes were never lower. It felt like our Major League Baseball team was hanging by a thread, which is something I don't think any of us were even considering being a possibility 6 months ago. Yep. It was really devastating, and we've all felt so powerless that our Major League Baseball team was kind of in the hands of kind of either career politicians that were kind of using the team as a political bargaining chip, and a greedy billionaire that was trying to maximize profits at all costs. It just felt like we were stuck between a rock and a hard place, and the only people that were suffering from it were the fans and the baseball players involved in the team. There was, and this is when a main character in this stadium saga kind of emerged in Chris Latvala, who I don't think anybody had really talked about in the context of the Rays before. Nobody in the sports world had definitely talked about him, and he emerged as kind of the leading voice against the Rays and then approving the new stadium bonds at this time. And there was speculation that he was upset that the Rays chose Steinbrenner Field over Clearwater and the Phillies option. And it emerged that he had some kind of ulterior motives in trying to get the Phillies the work, that he had kind of business relationships that he would potentially benefit from if the Phillies got that job, but he didn't. And people suspected that was part of the reasoning why he was kind of throwing his toys out the pram and very vocally on Twitter/X detracting the Rays stadium. But his stance would come to change.
It would, and unfortunately, before we got there, another kind of wave of moves happened at the end of the month, kind of before we got to the Rule 5 draft, which is coming at the beginning of December. We let go of 4 guys, all of which contributed in some way, some more than others, and one in particular, and you could say 2, but one in particular was a big contributor for the Rays over the past couple of years, in Richard Lovelady, Tyler Alexander, Dylan Carlson, and Colin Poche all being gone. And that is something that I think, added to the general kind of unhappiness, because you see some of these guys, you see like Carlson is one that we thought, maybe he could be the future of the Rays, outfield, maybe he'll figure it out and put it all together. He's gone. Poche, a guy that we've talked about a lot on the show, that we've liked a lot on this show, he's gone. Alexander was kind of a fun project. He's gone. Lovelady kind of the same way. Just kind of just general displeasured vibes kind of to end the month of November for the Rays.
Yeah, I think Lovelady, I don't think anybody particularly missed. He was just a kind of guy that we brought in when the bullpen was having a little bit of struggles, a little bit of lack of consistency early in the year. And Lovelady was a guy that there was potential in, but couldn't really put it together, and then got injured and then couldn't really find a way back into the team. So no one really minded that one. Tyler Alexander kind of dutifully fulfilled the swingman role, but wasn't great. He had negative WAR, and everyone kind of said, well, with McClanahan back and Springs back and Rasmussen back, he's kind of without a spot. And then Carlson, we bought low at the trade deadline, and got off to a really good start when he first turned up, and we thought, hey, maybe that solves our kind of lack of outfield depth. But then he kind of regressed to what he has been the past couple of years, which is a below replacement value outfielder that has that kind of former top prospect shine, but couldn't really go anywhere. You can see why the Rays might have let him go just because he did not perform. And Palacios and DeLuca and Lowe were going to hold down the outfield spots. So unless he was going to hang around as a fourth outfielder, you were going to let him go. And then Poche was the big one. And he came off like a good season, not a great season, but it was a good season. So I think that was slightly surprising. I was a little bit surprised that he was just non-tendered, but it seemed like the Rays had kind of shown their hand that they didn't really want him on the roster next year, so there wasn't really much value there for a trade. So they had to kind of just DFA him and let him go. I think the Rays shouldn't have shown their hand so clearly that they were going to move on from Poche, because I think he came off a good enough season that like a veteran reliever lefty that is been really good the past 2-3 seasons for the Rays could have got some value. I think that was a misstep there, but he's just recently signed a minor league contract, which is crazy that he couldn't even get a major league deal somewhere.
Who did he sign a minor league contract with?
I believe it was the Nationals. I'm going to double check that. You continue on the timeline, and I'll get that right.
Interesting, because I do think he is a major league level reliever, and he should be pitching for somebody, in my opinion. But anyway,
it was the Nationals. It was announced on Friday that he's signed a minor league deal with an invite to Major League Spring Training.
He'll get on the roster. I believe he'll be in Washington National. Good for him. I hope he gets paid in some form or fashion, because he's good, and he deserves to be a major league reliever.
Carlson also went to the Orioles.
He did go to the Orioles. That was the other thing I was going to say. Is Carlson goes to the Orioles. I do not believe that. I was trying to look and find. I don't think Tyler Alexander is signed somewhere. It doesn't really seem like there's room for him on the roster. Same with Lovelady, but I don't think they've signed somewhere.
Lovelady has signed a minor league deal with the Blue Jays with an invite to Major League Training. Alexander, I'm not seeing any news on him.
Okay. Speaking of news, we're going to move on to December, where we got kind of our first. We had a lot of guys going out in the month of November. The only guy coming in was Eric Orrs from the Mets. What we got for Siri. Not a lot of ends coming in, and we had a decent amount of ends in December, and one very big out, which we'll get to in a minute. But before we get there, the Rule 5 draft happened on the 11th of December, and there was a decent amount of stuff happening for the Rays. The two big ones were the picking of Nate Lavender with their 14th pick in the Rule 5 draft, and then they're trading for Mike Vassell from the Phillies in the Rule 5 draft, and adding a right-handed reliever in Mike Vassell and a left-handed reliever in Nate Lavender. That was something that we expected them to add something in the Rule 5, even when they tend to add pitching because they can hide a guy really easily. Nate Lavender is even easier to hide on the roster because he's probably going to go in the 60-day IL. We'd like both of those guys. I would expect Vassell at least to get a shot at the major league level and get a little run. He's probably going to be pitching for his job kind of from the beginning, would be my guess. But we do expect those guys to get at least a shot at the major league level. Evan Reifert was the Rays' only casualty from the Rule 5 draft.
Yeah, and we suspected Reifert would be the prime target for teams. Lavender is an interesting one because he's kind of a soft-throwing lefty. Which will be interesting to see how he fits into the bullpen mix, if at all, on return from his injury. And Mike Vassell, I think, is an unspectacular swingman type. I think he's the Tyler Alexander replacement, but just as a right-hander instead of a lefty. I think he could be – his role is interesting. I would be really surprised if he stuck the whole year on the team. Yeah. But I think there's a world where early in the season where McClanahan, Rasmussen could be, limited on the amount of innings that they're going to throw early, maybe go once through the order, 3 innings max. Mike Vassell could be a guy that eats some valuable innings early in the year as that Tyler Alexander swingman guy coming in after a short start for one of those recovering starters for us.
Yeah, and I think Mike Vassell Mike Vasso gets an even bigger role because of the next move that the Rays pulled off that I think famously, at least famously on this podcast, I said was not going to happen, and then immediately happened like maybe 2 hours after we got off the podcast. Jeffrey Springs was traded to the Oakland Athletics for Joe Boyle, Jacob Waters, and Will Simpson, and a competitive balance pick on December 14th. This was a move that I did not see coming at all. I was initially pretty displeased with it until I saw the return, at which point I was a little bit less displeased and have become, more and more okay with the move as time has gone on. How are a couple of months removed from it? How do you feel about the trade?
Yeah, I remember that we said that Springs wasn't going to get moved, and then he did. I remember that. We've made a habit of that this offseason. We also said Taylor Walls is going to be the starting shortstop, and we don't expect us to even think about getting a shortstop in. We you know what? We're good at analyzing what has actually happened, I think, but in predicting the future, I think the Rays are just the wrong team to even bother trying. But in terms of the Jeffrey Springs trade, yeah, it did strike us by surprise somewhat. We did speculate that the Rays could consider trading from their kind of glut of really good starting pitching that they had and try and improve the offense. What we didn't expect is that we got no improvements from the offense when they did make a trade in that area and traded Springs for more pitching, at least in the immediate return. Right. With Joe Boyle. I love Joe Boyle. I think people are forgetting that Joe Boyle's on the roster and in the mix for a rotation spot. I don't know if he will break camp in the rotation, but I think he might go down to AAA and they might try and develop him as a starter. And then when someone inevitably gets hurt, he's the sixth man up. And he's got such high upside. It's just, can we fix the command? We've got great track record of doing that. So I'm really high on Joe Boyle and I'm really excited. And you know what? The more I thought about it, the more I'm okay with Jeff Springs being the one to move on. He was the most expensive of the starting pitching group that we have, as he signed a mini extension with us. So he was on over 10 million. And so it made sense that he was the one moved, I suppose, especially with the A's consciously looking to add payroll at the time, so they signed Severino as well. So I think it's an interesting trade. I guess what Will Simpson and Jacob Waters work out to will also be a big factor. I'm okay with how the rotation looks now, so I'm completely fine with the trade. But it is a trade return that is high upside but also low downside. So it's a risky trade, I suppose. But I bank on the Rays pitching development to make it work.
Yeah, the scenario where I could see us regretting this trade is if we get into the season and if Shane is recovering slowly and not being able to pitch a lot of innings, if Taj looks more like, October or September Taj than June Taj or August Taj, and we have Boz also kind of having a rough start to the year, we could end up looking back at this trade kind of unfavorably, I think. That being said, if the Rays manage to do the magic they did on Tyler Glasnow to Joe Boyle, then we're going to be looking on this trade very favorably. So, I tend to, like you, put the probability on the Rays finding a way to make Joe Boyle work. The competitive balance pick is also something that we're going to have to watch and see how that ends up affecting the team in the long term. Who they choose with that pick is going to be interesting, because the Rays are always looking for those ways to add extra value. So it'll be interesting to see how this trade looks if we look back on it in a year or so.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note that as part of the offseason kind of roundup, we did have the draft lottery, which is a fairly recent addition to Major League schedule. But the Rays got the 14th pick in the first round, but we'll also be picking in the competitive balance round twice at 37 and 42. So, and we also pick 53rd as well. So we've got a lot of picks kind of in that top 50, 53, which, no one at the top 10, but we've got a lot of picks there. So it'll be interesting to see how we go about that draft.
Yeah, and I think that the Rays are going to really be able to hone in on guys that they want and guys that they like and get multiple chances at them. So I'm
Yeah, and
okay with that.
it's also the highest pick the Rays have had since 2017. So there you go.
Yeah. So the Rays, before the Jeffrey Springs trade happened, actually went a little out of order because that was kind of the biggest move. But the other big thing that happened in December was the Rays signed Danny Jansen the day after the Rule 5 draft on the 12th of December, which was something that we had kicked around Danny Jansen a little bit. We had kicked around a couple of catchers potentially as an addition, bringing him into the roster and having him potentially be a starting catcher, potentially be putting in for DH innings, is going to add another interesting kind of layer to this roster. And one of the things we kind of said pretty consistently about adding Danny Jansen is it has kind of raised the floor of the team a little bit by providing a league average or better bat at a position where we generally have not had that for a couple of years.
Yeah, and we talked about how this was it felt fairly un-Raysy as a move, but we did talk at length about the potential addition of a catcher. It pretty much had to happen, an addition of a catcher, because otherwise things were gonna be rough. We put up 67 WRC plus from the catcher position last year, which is really bad. Really, really bad. And in fact, it is 26th in the big leagues. Only, you know what? The Texas Rangers, Cleveland Guardians, Chicago White Sox, and Miami Marlins were worse. But we had to add a backup catcher because currently it was Rotvet and Driscoll, who, like, Driscoll you could see maybe working into something. Rotvet, we kind of know what he is, where he's got a cannon of an arm, so-so blocking and game calling, can make contact on the ball but never really produce power. Driscoll was kind of a maybe you'll be decent kind of guy. So we had to add a bit of catching depth. And I remember me and Carter spoke on the show about a few options. I remember he floated Yasmani Grandal as a really good fit. But we ended up going for what could be considered the top free agent catcher on the board in Danny Jansen in terms of what he can produce offensively. He will create a major league average bat from the catching position, which, 40% better than what we had, and gets rid of a dead zone. Will the Rays game calling and base stealing vulnerabilities be further exposed? Probably. Danny Jansen's not an arm guy, but he's really good at blocking. How this will all work out and what split of the playing time Danny Jansen will get will be interesting. I think he'll get a chance to get the majority of the games out there. But I want to see how it works because this is not a catcher the Rays would usually go for.
And another, before we're going to have a little bit more Trop stuff here and a little bit more stadium stuff here in a sec. But I want to bring in one more kind of positive thing before we get back to the Trop stuff. And that is another move that, I don't know if it was as unraised. This feels a little bit more raisy than the Danny Jansen move was signing Eloy Jimenez to a minor league deal and a invite to spring training. Kind of throwing another hat in the ring for the DH outfield-ish, probably not much outfield if he makes it, probably going to be playing mostly DH because he doesn't really, move too well. But adding a guy that we know has a bat, at least has had a bat, and giving him a shot to kind of earn a spot on the roster, which kind of, speaks to the fact that there are spots up for grabs this spring training.
Yeah, and he was pretty bad last year between the White Sox and Orioles, but we've seen what he looks like when he's on his game, and he's one of the biggest power bats in the game when he's on it. So that was a few years ago now. Can he return to that form? I guess he'll be more motivated than ever now that he's back on a minor league deal. He's not on that extension. He signed with the White Sox not long after his debut. He's got to earn it. So he's really got to. This is it. He will be trying his best. He will be putting his full effort into making this work, and we'll see if he's still got anything left in the tank. The good thing about this signing is that if he doesn't, then he probably just doesn't break camp, and then he goes back into the free agent pile again, and we don't really lose anything. If he does well, then we pay him $2 million if he cracks the opening day roster, but that means he's done very well, and then we've got an extra power bat and hopefully consistent power bat at the DH spot, which is always useful to have.
It is, and Eloy Jimenez is definitely a bit of a wild card for this Rays roster. If you look at what you wear every day and you don't want to have any wild cards in your clothing roster, and you want to know that every time you reach in there, you're going to have something that's excellent and want no variance there, there's a very simple solution for you. It's shop.rblrsports.com, where you can get all of the best merch inspired by your favorite Tampa Bay sports teams. Rowdies, Bucks, Lightning, Rays, and Sun. It's all there. Shop.rblrsports.com. Use promo code FLAPPY, FLAPPY, for 10% off your entire order there. Give yourself some solidification in your clothing roster today at shop.rblrsports.com.
Yeah, there's going to be no uncertainty when you get RBLR merch. It's just a sure thing, and we love a sure thing. Takes the dead zone out your wardrobe. It's great.
Yep. And speaking of sure things, let's talk about the stadium again, which is the opposite of that. On the 12th, we kind of got some more news about the Trop. We got the numbers that it would be about $56 million to repair it. The discussions were sort of positive around the repair, and they've been sort of positive around repairing the Trop since then. That led us to the 17th, where there was a unexpected vote on the bond, which meant that the numbers had flipped and they felt like they had the votes to get it approved, and the bonds got approved on December 17th. What did not get approved, and what has still not gotten approved, and something that's been a point of consternation, is any additional funding for the Rays Stadium. And that we're going to get back to this a little bit later, but this is kind of the thing that's holding the deal up right now, is the Rays are saying we need $150 million extra to put this stadium on track because of the delay around the bonds that began in October. And the city has basically been like, you're a billionaire, figure it out. And so they're at an impasse there, and that's kind of holding up anything else moving forward right now with the stadium.
Yeah, this was kind of the last big development, I think, in the stadium saga, that the council essentially called Stu Sternberg and the Rays executive team's bluff and said, okay, fine, we'll sign the contract, make the stadium now then. And I guess going back to Chris Latvala, he was the big vote flip that kind of caused this vote to go through. And by the way he's been posturing himself on social media, it very much feels like the council are doing this as a call of the bluff. And unfortunately, despite the Rays and Stu Sternberg's attempts to try and fork out more money out of this deal because of the delay, it says in the agreement that was signed and approved and has been fully ratified now that the Rays and Rays ownership are fully financially responsible for any cost overrun of the project. And the council can, I think, fairly reliably state that this is cost overrun. So you're responsible for that.
And there's really been no impasse since that point. A lot of posturing since then. We'll have a couple minor updates as we go forward, but that's kind of the thing that's holding everything up now. So a lot remains to be seen what will happen there. Moving into January, not a whole lot of additions happened in January. Brandon Eisert was a trade. You'll hear his name again in a second here. Was traded from Toronto for cash. We also signed Jonathan Hernandez to an MILB deal and a spring training invite. The 9th of January, Littell, Boz, and Clevenger all settled their arbitration before they needed to go to arbitration and got their contract sorted out. Walls did not, and that was there was a bit of social media consternation on that. Won't get too into that, but there was definitely some stuff going on there, which then led to, on January 22nd, Walls signing a 2-year extension for kind of what we thought was going to be a confirmation that Walls is going to be the starting shortstop for the majority of 2025.
Yeah. Famously, everyone agreed to avoid arbitration except Walls, and Topkin Mark Topkin, the lead reporter for the Tampa Bay Times, tweeted this story and then followed that up with a tweet about Walls' offensive numbers in the 2024 season. And didn't kind of add a spin. He just said, here are Walls' numbers, which were not very good and did not reflect very well on the player. Walls then decided to take to social media himself and replied to that tweet saying, well, what about my defensive numbers? Which kind of caused a bit of a mini kind of back and forth within the Rays community about Taylor Walls. Walls then replied to a few other people while on social media, getting quite defensive about his own playing ability and career, as he has every right to, I suppose, as he is probably in the top 1% of baseball players in the world, being able to play regularly at the major league level. And, you know, fans are not as good at baseball as Taylor Walls is. So yeah, it was a bit weird, but then, yeah, like you said, he worked out the extension, and that was what caused us to say, I guess the Rays are like, this is our guy we're going to ride with until Carson Williams is ready. And we all said, there's no way they're going to get another shortstop after doing this move.
To be continued.
We're going to be continued
in just a minute. But before we get there, the Walls, that whole thing. The truth is, like you said, Walls is in the top 1% of baseball players, probably maybe top like 2 or 3%. I couldn't tell you the numbers, but he's also probably in the top like 5% of defenders in MLB, and maybe in the top 1% of defenders in MLB. So he definitely does provide value. We don't need to relitigate all of that again. The last kind of major thing that happened in January was the spring training invites went out. A lot of notable names on there: Xavier Isaac, Trey Morgan, Carson Williams, a whole bunch of pitchers, 15 pitchers and 11 infielders, I can't do math. 15 infielders, total of 30 people coming to spring training. Do yourself a favor and take a look at the list if you haven't already, or just watch our episode about that. Don't need to go into too much detail on all those guys because we already kind of did that. But a lot of really interesting names on there that are getting spring training invites that are going to be a huge topic of conversation as we get into spring training starting next week.
Yeah. Loads of interesting names there. Lots of prospects that have a lot of kind of hype around them, like Xavier Isaac and Trey Morgan, Braden Taylor, Chandler Simpson. And we kind of break down why these guys are exciting on last week's episode. So if you haven't and you missed last week's episode, I recommend kind of catching the back half of last week's episode where we're really focusing on those prospects that have been invited and a couple of pitchers too.
Yep. And to kind of end January and begin February, a move that we have been kind of teasing at this entire episode as we're talking about recapping the season, the biggest move that happened this entire offseason, seemingly out of nowhere. Alex Faedo was traded from – no, I'm just kidding. We'll talk about him in a second. Ha-Sung Kim signed to a $29 million free agent deal, totally reshaping the Rays infield. He is hurt, and he probably will not play until mid-May at the best. So we are still going to see Walls to begin the season. But a four-war type guy added via free agency for the Rays, something we did not expect and something that completely changes the floor for this team as we look to 2025.
Yeah, he has Walls standard defense, which is what kept him on the roster for so long, but actually can hit to a kind of major league average, and actually for the past 3 years, better than major league average hitter, which we always said, oh, imagine if Taylor Walls was like an 85 WRC plus guy, he would be so low. Well, we basically got Taylor Walls if he was a 110 WRC plus guy. So yeah, completely changes the outlook. It now feels like, apart from maybe left field feeling a little underwhelming, or maybe center field could maybe do with a jump, the Rays infield in particular just feels like completely rock solid. And yeah, it completely changes the outlook of the team, like you said, from like a wild card chase team to like a team that's comfortably in the wild card, maybe one move away from chasing a division.
And that is, to me, so changes kind of our mindset going into the season, because the one big hole you could look at on this team from an offensive standpoint has now been filled, at least for the majority of the season. And I, for one, am really excited to see this guy in a Rays uniform. He's just going to be so much fun to watch him. With him leaving, the guy, some of the guys that left to bring him on, Brandon Eisert, who we traded for, then got DFA'd and went to the White Sox, one of the shorter Rays tenures out there. He's now with the White Sox. And then Osleivis Basabe, the oft hated on shortstop that just never quite got there, got a little bit of a shot when he who shall not be named was unceremoniously removed from the roster, got a little bit of a shot then, did some pretty okay things, and then not much since then. He is gone. In comes Alex Faedo, as mentioned earlier, from Detroit. He is an interesting starting pitcher. We haven't really talked about him because that happened this week. So really briefly, just to kind of break him down, Faedo is a guy who's been in the Detroit system for a long time. He has been a starter for most of it, was a starter in college with the University of Florida, has had some really good moments, had a nice season last season, put up a decent amount of innings, put up a decent performance, but did get taken out of the rotation towards the end of the season. When Detroit brought in some better options, at least in their eyes, from free agency and from trades, and was kind of an odd man out. So we traded for him. He's a guy that, it'll be interesting to see how he feeds into the pitching staff if he makes the opening day roster. But he is a guy that has performed at a acceptable level as a starting pitcher at the major league level, and could potentially fight for innings, at least to begin the season.
Yeah, he's going to be like Mike Vassell, where he's a bit of a swingman, could fit in as a starter or a multi-inning reliever, could come in after an opener type beat. Yeah, he has got an absolutely disgusting slider, for what it's worth, and that generates a lot of swing and miss. His slider is disgusting. Problem is the rest of his pitch mix is a little underwhelming. His changeup's okay. His fastball's not very good. You will very occasionally whip in a sinker as well. He also struggles with command a little bit as well. That's partially because he throws such a wipeout slider that it can tail outside the zone, and if you lay off of it, it's not going to do very much. But he's good at limiting hard contact. If he could get his command a little bit better, he could be a really good guy. And like you said, his 2024 was not that bad at all. He had a lower ERA than Colin Poche and a similar number of innings. There's a guy there, and it'll be interesting to see what the Rays do with his pitch mix. Maybe he goes like fully like slider 60% of the time, change up 20% of the time, and then like fastball reduced, or maybe he tries to lean into the sinker a little bit more. We'll see. We'll see how they use him. I think he may end up I think he's got an easier path to playing time than Mike Vassell.
And he's another one of these guys that's kind of someone who's been on kind of the boulevard of top prospects that never really quite made it. But there is a reason he was a top prospect. He does have things there that are valuable. And it's just a question of, will the Rays find a way to kind of get some value out of him? And can he provide a couple of, valuable innings? And we'll see. That's what spring training is all about. That's starting very, very soon. We're gonna get to see some of that stuff. And that's going to be exciting. What's not as exciting is to kind of put a bow on where we are on the stadium saga. Stu inserted his foot into his mouth once again this week, basically saying directly to Mark Tompkin that he has the money to get the stadium project rolling. He's just basically trying to decide if he wants to or not, or if he feels like he should, or if it's a good value for him. And I don't have the emotional bandwidth to do this again and to go at Stu Sternberg one more time. But I think it's pretty clear to everybody that this is a guy who only sees the Rays as a business operation for him, and that is it. And it's really, really disheartening as a sports fan to watch the guy that owns your team clearly care so little about the actual team beyond the value of it as a business property.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself. I could spend the money on this, but do I want to though? just is like the last thing we want to hear after all this backing and forthing and all this kind of puffing your chest out and be like, you got to pay for this, you got to pay for that. And then Stu was like, actually, I had the money the whole time. I just didn't really want to spend it. Is really frustrating. It's like, oh, what was all this for then? Yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself. It's just frustrating. And hopefully MLB steps in and forces a sale of the team. I think Stu has two options and he needs to decide on those two options by the end of March, I believe, is how long the bonds are valid for.
31st,
yeah. So he's got till the end of March to decide whether or not he actually wants to build this stadium or if he sells the team. Which is a rock and a hard place for him because either he has to give up an asset or and he will make a profit on that asset, mind you. And I don't feel that sorry for him because he could probably sell the Rays for $1 billion. But you will have to give up an asset or he will have to pay money to increase the value of his asset.
By the way, he would make a profit on the asset as he has been doing almost the entire time he's owned the team.
Oh yeah, when I say it's a hard choice, I mean it's like, oh, do I want $1 or $2 kind of choice? Like, and by do you want $1 or $2? I mean, do I want $500 million profit now, or do I want to spend a bit of money now and get like $1 billion profit in like 3 years' time?
It's so good that this is all happening right before spring training starts, so that my mind can just be taken off of all of this nonsense, and we can just talk about baseball and the actual sport being played and the players that we're so excited about being played. I want to end kind of our recap. I don't want to end the recap on a negative note. I want to
ask a question.
Ask a question before my last note.
I think a fun exercise to do is try and make the off season one big trade. And you look at it through the eyes of it being the Rays made one move. Okay. And the one move they made was they traded Colin Poche, Tyler Alexander, Richard Lovelady, Dylan Carlson, Jeff Springs, Jacob Lopez, Jose Siri, Austin Shenton, Renee Pinto, and Justin Sterner for Danny Jansen, Ha-Sung Kim, Eloy Jimenez, Alex Faedo, Joe Boyle, and Mike Vasso and Nate Lavender. Do you think the Rays have got better making that trade? And I didn't include minor league pieces.
Yeah, I think they have. When you put it like that, and I would also like to add, we've also traded those guys for a electric run from Junior Caminero in the Dominican League, which is going to be my last note. If you put it that way, I feel pretty good about the offseason, actually.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think of the players that we lost, most of them sat around between 0.5 and minus 0.5 FWAR projections. But the players we added apart from Jeff Springs, I think is the only real productive guy that we lost.
Yeah.
That would put up, 3-4 WAR. Right. But we added a 3-4 WAR guy in Kim, and we added what's probably a 2-3 WAR guy in Jansen.
Yeah.
And then you have all your pitches, which could be a varying amount of WAR.
Yeah.
I guess
I really like that.
You could add Shane McClanahan into that trade if you want. We got Shane McClanahan back.
Yep, you absolutely can, and you can add Carson Williams in the back half of this year to that trade. Mm-hmm. You can add another season of development for Junior Caminero and an offseason of development for him into that trade. And when you look at it from that perspective, it's a pretty good deal. The Rays were never going to make the earth-shattering move. It just never is in the cards. Although you could kind of argue Kim was the closest that we're ever going to get to that kind of thing. That was a pretty big move. He was a guy that some people expected to make $20 million a year, and the Rays found a way to get him on the roster for less than that, and to get him on the roster for potentially 2 years, and to be kind of the guy that ushers you into the Carson Williams era of Rays baseball. And that's a pretty awesome move done by the Rays that I did not think was possible. So when you kind of, have it in that perspective, at the end of the day, I'm pretty happy with the offseason. Were there things that I would have loved to have happened that didn't happen? Yes. We didn't add an outfielder of note. And would I have loved that? Yes, I would have. But when you look at the moves that they made and put it all together like you just did, it was a good productive offseason for the Rays.
Yeah, 100%. And I think everyone said, look, we need to add offense, particularly at shortstop and catcher. And they did that. They absolutely did that. Yeah, we could have probably added an outfielder. I'm still going to be like, Luis Robert, he's right there, guys. But could you say, I wish this stadium saga was a bit more straightforward? We could have maybe got Roki Sasaki. I'm not saying we definitely would have, but it would have raised our odds of getting Roki Sasaki if the stadium thing worked out a little bit better. Maybe there was a couple of free agents that we talked to that did balk at the stadium idea and kind of stopped discussions in their tracks. But with the scenario that the front office had in front of them, I think they had a completely solid offseason that has definitely raised the floor of this team by quite a stretch. Because that was the thing that worried me about this team, is that this team has a good ceiling. I don't think it's 100 wins. I don't think this is 100. There's a world where this team wins 100 games, but this was a team that had a ceiling that, was in the mid 90s. But now, for me, the floor has gone from 75 wins to 82 wins.
Yeah, and if you just get a little above that floor, you can be in the playoffs. And all you need to win a World Series is get in the playoffs. As much as we talk about liking to have a team that's a little better put together, that maybe is winning 95 games, which we may have now, all you need to do is just get in the tournament. If you get in the tournament, you're going to have a good chance. And because the Rays have good pitching, if they get in the tournament, they're always going to have a chance because they can ride that pitching all the way to the bank. And we hope that they're going to be able to ride a guy like Junior Caminero, who lit the world on fire to end the Dominican season and just had a electric ending with a home run over a massive wall and a massive bat flip, which you should watch if you haven't. And that is kind of what takes us into the season, is hope. Hope in Ha-Seong Kim, hope in the pitching staff, hope in Junior Caminero and guys like Carson Williams to develop and to bring this team forward into 2025 and beyond. And through all the doom and gloom that happened around the stadium, and that maybe continues to be there a little bit, I think we end this offseason and head into 2025 with a good amount of hope and a belief that this team can do some really cool things.
Yeah, I feel really good about the team. I think this is a playoff team. I still think, despite everything that's happened in the offseason, I think the thing I said back in November of we've really got to watch Chris Morel and Junior Caminero, because I think how well they're doing is how well this team's going to do. I think they're still if Chris Morel and Junior Caminero are doing well, the team's doing well. If they're not doing well, they're probably underperforming. They have 41% playoff odds from Fangraphs right now, but I think I'd put it more 55%, but maybe I'm a homer.
Yep, and I think that is kind of the beauty of the next couple of weeks, and as the season starts to begin, is we're going to find out. We're going to find out if these guys can do what we think they can do. We're going to find out if this team is as good as we think it is, and that's the beauty of baseball. And we hope that as we're going on that journey to discover all of that stuff, that you will be there with us. And we hope you enjoyed this kind of recap of everything. Let us know in the comments what your favorite move of the offseason was, what your least favorite move, if you want, of the offseason was, what you think about the stadium and where we're going. We'd love to hear from you guys. If you enjoyed the show, do us a huge favor and like the video or like us on social media. Drop us a follow or a subscribe. Check if you're subscribed. You may think you be subscribed and may not be subscribed. A lot of times that happens. YouTube can just sort of shadow unsubscribe people sometimes. So do us a huge favor and check on that if you think you're subscribed. Helps us out so much. And we're going to be bringing you guys awesome content all season long, starting with positional reviews coming next week. We're so excited to bring that to you guys and to set up this season. But for now, raise up.
Raise up.
Thank you for tuning into this presentation by RBLR Sports. On your way out of the stadium, please remember to like and subscribe.